Welcome to EngloStories. Today, we have a fascinating and chillish tale to share with you. The Monkey's Paw was written by W. W. Jacobs, an English author, and was first published in 1902. This story has become one of the most famous horror tales in English literature. The story centers around a small family who receives a strange gift, a dried monkey's paw that supposedly grants 3 wishes. But, as they will soon discover, these wishes come with a terrible price. This mysterious tale explores what happens when people try to change their fate and the unexpected consequences that follow. As you listen to this story, think about what you might wish for if you had 3 wishes, and consider whether getting exactly what you ask for is always a good thing. Let's begin our journey into this classic story of supernatural wishes and terrible consequences. Now, let's begin the story. In a small, cozy house far from the busy city, the White family was enjoying a quiet evening together. Mr. White, an older man with kind eyes, was playing chess with his adult son Herbert, while Mrs. White sat knitting by the warm fireplace. Outside, the wind howled and rain beat against the windows, but inside, the family felt safe and comfortable. Their simple home was filled with old furniture that told stories of many happy years together. Pictures of family memories hung on the walls, and a small lamp cast a gentle light over the room. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time in this peaceful home. The Whites were simple, hard-working people. Mr. White had worked many years at a nearby factory, while Mrs. White kept their home with care and love. Their son Herbert, a young man with a cheerful smile, also worked at a factory and lived with his parents. On this particular night, they were expecting a visitor, Sergeant Major Morris, an old friend of Mr. White, who had spent 20 years traveling in exotic places like India. When a loud knock came at the door, Mr. White hurried to welcome his friend in from the storm. Sergeant Major Morris entered, shaking rain from his coat. After warm greetings, the family gathered around as their visitor began sharing amazing stories of faraway places. Little did they know that this visit would change their lives forever. After dinner and several drinks, Sergeant Major Morris reached into his pocket and pulled out a small dried object. It was a monkey's paw, black and twisted, looking like a small shriveled hand. "What is that strange thing?" asked Mr. White, leaning forward with curiosity. "This," said the sergeant major in a serious voice, "is a monkey's paw that has magic powers. A very holy man in India put a spell on it. He wanted to show that fate rules people's lives, and those who try to change it do so at their own danger." "But what does it do?" asked Mrs. White. "It grants 3 wishes to 3 different people," replied Morris. "I don't know what the first man wished for, but his 3rd wish was for death. I was the second owner, and I have had my 3 wishes." The family looked at him with growing interest. "And did you really have 3 wishes granted?" asked Herbert with a smile of doubt. "I did," said the sergeant major, his face growing pale, "but I would not wish a 4th time even if I could." He threw the paw into the fire. Mr. White quickly reached into the flames and saved it. "Better let it burn," warned Morris. "If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Wish for something sensible." Later that night, after Morris had left, the White family discussed the paw. Herbert laughed about it, but Mr. White was curious. "I think I'll wish for 200 pounds, said Mr. White, holding up the paw. "That would pay off our house." "Be careful, dear," said his wife. Mr. White held up the paw and said clearly, "I wish for 200 pounds. The paw moved in his hand, twisting like a snake. He dropped it with a cry, and they all stared at it on the floor. "It moved," he whispered. Herbert picked it up, examined it, and placed it on the table. "I don't see any money," said Herbert with a laugh, "and I bet you won't." They all went to bed, trying to forget about the strange event. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Herbert went to work as usual, joking about the money before he left. Later that day, a well-dressed man arrived at their door. He looked uncomfortable and sad. "I come from Ma and Megan's factory," he said when Mrs. White invited him in. "I'm sorry to say that your son Herbert was caught in the machinery today." Mrs. White put her hands to her mouth in horror. "He was killed?" continued the man, looking at the floor. "The company wishes to express their sympathy, and though they are not responsible, they offer you a payment of 200 pounds. Mrs. White screamed, and Mr. White's face turned white as he remembered his wish. 1 week after Herbert's funeral, the White home was filled with silence and grief. Mrs. White sat by the window day after day, crying and watching the empty road. Mr. White tried to comfort her, but his own heart was heavy with guilt, believing that his wish had caused their son's death. One night, Mrs. White suddenly jumped up from her chair, her eyes wild with hope. "The paw!" she cried. "The monkey's paw! We still have 2 wishes left. We can wish Herbert back to life." Mr. White's face filled with horror. "No," he whispered. "It's not natural. You don't know what he might look like. He's been dead for 10 days. "I don't care," Mrs. White shouted. "I want my son. Bring him back. Where is the paw?" Mr. White tried to reason with her. The graveyard was 2 miles away. Herbert would have changed in death. But Mrs. White would not listen. Finally, with shaking hands, Mr. White took out the monkey's paw. "Wish!" commanded Mrs. White. "I wish my son alive again," said Mr. White in a low, fearful voice. The paw dropped to the floor. Nothing happened. Mrs. White looked around desperately, then rushed to the window. "He's coming," she said confidently. "It takes time for him to walk from the graveyard." They waited in terrible silence. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet house. An hour passed with no sound but the wind outside. Mrs. White sobbed in disappointment. Mr. White, exhausted, went to bed, relieved that the wish seemed to have failed. Just as he was falling asleep, a strange sound reached his ears, a soft, distant knocking. He sat up, listening. The knocking came again, louder this time. "What's that?" he whispered. "It's Herbert!" cried Mrs. White, running downstairs to the door. Mr. White followed, his heart filled with terror. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Something was outside their door, something that had come from the graveyard. "Don't open it," pleaded Mr. White, grabbing his wife's arm. "For God's sake, don't open it." Mrs. White fought against her husband's grip, trying to reach the door. The knocking continued, growing stronger and more demanding with each moment. "Let me go," she cried. "It's my boy. It's Herbert. I forgot he didn't have a key. He's come back." Mr. White held her back with all his strength. "For God's sake, don't let it in," he begged, his voice shaking with fear, his mind filled with terrible images of what their son might look like after the accident and 10 days in the grave. The knocking continued. Mrs. White broke free and ran to the door. She struggled with the top bolt, which was stiff from lack of use. Mr. White stumbled across the dark room, searching desperately for the monkey's paw. He knew now what he must do. "Where is it? Where is the paw?" he muttered, feeling around on the floor where he had dropped it. Outside, whatever was knocking seemed determined to enter. The door shook with each blow. Mrs. White was crying as she fought with the stubborn bolt. "Comin', Herbert, comin'," she called. The bolt began to move. Mr. White could hear it sliding back slowly. His fingers finally touched the dry, rough surface of the monkey's paw. He grabbed it and held it up, his heart pounding with terror. The door bolt shot back with a loud click. Mrs. White reached for the door handle. "I wish him dead and at peace again," Mr. White shouted, his voice breaking with emotion as he held up the paw for the final wish. The knocking stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was more frightening than the noise had been. Mrs. White opened the door with a triumphant cry, letting in a rush of cold wind. The street lamp outside flickered in the wind, showing the empty street. No one was there. Nothing moved in the darkness beyond their doorway. Mrs. White fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Mr. White slowly walked to the open door and looked out. The road stretched empty in both directions. Whatever had been knocking, whether their son returned from the grave or something else, was gone. The monkey's paw had granted their final wish, and now they were truly alone with their grief and the terrible knowledge of what they had almost brought into their home. The story of the monkey's paw teaches us several important lessons. First, we should be careful what we wish for, as getting exactly what we ask for might have unexpected and terrible consequences. Sometimes, what we think we want is not what we truly need. Second, the story shows us that trying to change fate or the natural order of things can lead to disaster. Death is final, and trying to undo it goes against nature. Finally, the tale reminds us that grief can make people desperate and lead them to make dangerous choices. The Whites' love for their son almost brought something unnatural into their world because they couldn't accept his death. Some things, once done, cannot be undone. Thank you for listening to The Monkey's Paw on EngloStories. If you enjoyed this tale, please like this video and share it with friends who are learning English. What would you wish for if you had the monkey's paw? Let us know in the comments below. Follow EngloStories as we upload a story daily so that you can look forward to our next video. Tomorrow, we'll share another classic English story to help you improve your language skills while enjoying great literature.